Kleptopia is not just an exposé, it is a warning. Burgis shows how dirty money is not a side effect of global capitalism, but its twisted cousin. It flows through every crack in the system, exploiting gaps in law, culture, and morality. The world's current responses, while notable, are insufficient. We are past the point where isolated sanctions or compliance tweaks will suffice. What Burgis ultimately demands is not just reform but reckoning. He calls on readers to recognize that democracy itself is on the line. Kleptocracy is not just about stolen billions, it's about stolen futures. It distorts justice, hollows out institutions, and undermines the very idea that public life can serve the public good. And yet, the story isn't over. Whistleblowers, journalists, and citizens are still fighting. Truth is still dangerous. But as Burgis shows, it's also necessary, because the most powerful tool in the kleptocrat's arsenal is secrecy. And the antidote always is exposure. Part 1: Crisis. The book begins in the shadows of the 2008 global financial crisis, a time when the glittering facades of capitalism began to crumble, revealing the hidden architecture beneath, a world rigged in favor of kleptocrats. Burgis introduces readers to a series of interwoven characters and locations, grounding the narrative in the lives of people entangled in webs of money laundering, state corruption, and political manipulation. We meet Nigel Wilkins, a former banker turned whistleblower. His moral awakening inside the London office of BSI, a Swiss bank, encapsulates the core dilemma of the modern financial system. When those charged with compliance are disempowered or complicit, the system itself becomes a laundromat. Wilkins' quiet integrity offers a stark contrast to the broader inertia of institutions that prioritize profits over principles. As he collects evidence of large-scale fraud, he realizes the rot is not exceptional, it is foundational. Crisis, then, is not merely a collapse of banks or a market correction, but a moment of revelation. Burgis reveals how the financial system, ranging from British law firms to American real estate developers, is not only tolerating but facilitating kleptocracy. From Cheapside to Moscow, Pretoria to Harare, the world's capital cities pulse with illicit flows of cash, each movement hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and bank secrecy. Alexander Mochkovich Sasha, one-third of the so-called trio of Central Asian oligarchs, illustrates how capitalism's tools, initial public offerings, shell companies, high-end lawyers, can be weaponized. The story of the Eurasian Natural Resources Corporation, ENRC, is a masterclass in legal arbitrage. With the backing of Nursultan Nazarbayev, Kazakhstan's authoritarian ruler, the trio transformed natural resource wealth into financial leverage, using London's financial markets as a platform for legitimacy. Burgis frames the early 2000s as the golden age of unregulated flows. The world's largest law firms, banks, and auditing companies earned their share of this blood-stained prosperity. London, in particular, is portrayed not as a victim of global corruption, but as one of its most enthusiastic enablers. Laws meant to protect civil society, like those requiring companies to know their clients, became box-ticking exercises, often bypassed through plausible deniability and regulatory theater. This part ends not with resolution, but escalation. Burgis underscores that corruption is no longer about envelopes under the table. It has become systematic, digitized, and enshrined in policy. The financial crisis didn't put an end to dirty money. It accelerated its proliferation. As economies faltered, kleptocrats found ever more welcoming homes for their fortunes and ever more desperate partners in Western democracies willing to look the other way. Part 2: Chrysalis. Where crisis diagnosed the disease, Chrysalis traces its evolution. we begin to see how dirty money changes not only balance sheets, but the institutions it touches. The metaphor of a chrysalis is APT. What appears stable on the outside is undergoing a transformation, though not one of hope or natural development, but of manipulation, fear, and collusion. Central to this section is the story of Mukhtar Ablyazov, a Kazakh banker and former regime insider who becomes a dissident after falling out with Nazarbayev. Ablyazov, once the chairman of BTA Bank, is a figure of ambiguity, both victim and villain. Accused of embezzling billions and chased across multiple jurisdictions, his tale serves as a reminder that in the world of kleptocracy, lines between persecutor and persecuted often blur. As Ablyazov tries to position himself as a democratic alternative to Nazarbayev, Burgis does not offer easy answers. Is he a reformer? Or simply a kleptocrat on the outs, seeking to reclaim power through Western sympathy? His legal battles span multiple continents, ensnaring British courts and private investigators, further entrenching the legal industry's role in laundering not just money, but reputations. This is where Burgis sharpens his critique of the West. Law firms like Deckert and auditors like PwC are no longer passive bystanders, but active players in a global game. Through strategic litigation and public relations campaigns, kleptocrats repurpose Western democratic tools for personal gain. The same mechanisms designed to ensure transparency and justice, due process, confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, are inverted. Simultaneously, we witness the tightening grip of surveillance and counterintelligence. In Russia, the FSB and other remnants of Soviet-era spycraft now operate in a world where money is more powerful than ideology. The line between private investigator and intelligence operative is almost non-existent. Everyone is watching everyone else. The paranoia that defined the Cold War now undergirds the operations of oil companies, tech conglomerates, and hedge funds. Chrysalis then becomes not just a stage of development, but a threat, a warning that kleptocracy is embedding itself within the global order. Corruption is no longer about isolated pockets of bad actors. It is a shape-shifting force that adapts to institutions, feeding off weaknesses in oversight and exploiting economic dependence. The heroes in this part, whistleblowers, investigative journalists, and outcast diplomats, are fragile and few. Some end up dead. Others vanish into bureaucratic obscurity. The system, by design, exhausts resistance. Legal costs mount, stories are buried, and the public loses interest. But Burgis doesn't let the reader turn away. Every thread he pulls reveals another layer of complicity. Part 3. Metamorphosis. By the time we reach metamorphosis, the transformation is complete. Kleptocracy is no longer an aberration. It is the organizing principle. Burgis moves from individual case studies to a broader tapestry, connecting Brexit, Donald Trump, and the rise of authoritarian populism to the same networks of dark money described in the earlier parts. Here, the book becomes more urgent. Burgis argues that kleptocracy has found its way not just into markets and politics, but into the very soul of democracy. Dirty money funds election campaigns, distorts public narratives, and enables disinformation campaigns. The same money that once bought diamonds in Congo or oil fields in Kazakhstan now funds think tanks, YouTube ads, and politicians. One of the most chilling sections is Burgis's description of the man with no past, a character who operates across jurisdictions, untethered from ideology, law, or loyalty. This figure becomes a symbol for modern corruption, a person without consequence. There is no border he cannot cross, no contract he cannot rewrite, no enemy he cannot silence. If the 20th century was about states versus states, the 21st century is increasingly about networks, fluid, opaque, and unaccountable. Burgis weaves in the rise of surveillance capitalism, the commodification of data, and the inability of regulatory agencies to keep up with the speed and complexity of global finance. The institutions meant to uphold the rule of law, courts, parliaments, media outlets, are being outpaced, outspent, and outmaneuvered. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens are left bewildered, struggling with stagnant wages, rising inequality, and the creeping sense that justice is reserved for the wealthy. The final chapters expose how kleptocracy corrodes even resistance. NGOs are infiltrated. Investigations are compromised. Activists are spied on, harassed, and in some cases murdered. The machinery of oppression has gone private. Even more terrifying, it's been normalized. Burgis doesn't give us a Hollywood-style ending. Instead, he closes with a challenge. If kleptocracy is the system, then what does resistance even look like? What the world has done to combat dirty money. Burgis does not leave us without some answers. Over the past decade, spurred by investigative journalism and public outrage, a patchwork of reforms and actions has emerged to confront the challenge of dirty money. The Panama Papers and Paradise Papers exposed offshore secrecy to a global audience, leading to resignations, tax reforms, and in some cases, criminal prosecutions. Transparency International and similar watchdogs have pushed for public registers of beneficial ownership, now adopted by several countries, including the UK, Ukraine, and parts of the EU. The U.S. passed the Corporate Transparency Act in 2021, requiring anonymous shell companies to disclose their true owners to the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. The EU's fifth anti-money laundering directive added new rules on cryptocurrency, prepaid cards, and art markets. Global coordination through the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, has tightened standards on financial institutions. Some kleptocrats have faced consequences. The U.S. Magnitsky Act allows targeted sanctions against individuals involved in human rights abuses and corruption. The UK and Canada have adopted similar laws. The global Magnitsky sanctions regime has frozen assets and restricted travel for dozens of elites. But these actions, while significant, are often piecemeal and reactive. Enforcement remains weak. London still launders more money than nearly any other city. Real estate, luxury goods, and campaign finance remain fertile ground for illicit cash. For every sanctioned oligarch, a dozen more operate freely through new proxies. The world has built better transparency tools, but lacks the political will and institutional capacity to use them at scale. Worse, authoritarian regimes have learned to exploit these same systems, using libel laws, surveillance, and legal intimidation to silence critics. Kleptocrats have gone global, but democratic responses remain mostly national and fragmented.